Coming up this morning on Europe Today, the governor of Japan's central bank tells the government it must cut taxes to stimulate the economy.
The European Union says it will stand by Asia to help it overcome the region's economic turmoil.
And there is speculation that Wim Josenberg is back at the top of the list to head the European Central Bank. It's 7 a.m. on Monday, the 6th of April. Good morning and welcome to Europe Today. I am Juan Senor.
And I'm Rosalie Nelson. Also ahead in the show, we'll have a full look at the markets, world news, and also a look at the latest weather and travel situation.
Let's start with a look at the live Asian markets and also a reminder of how the Dow Jones Industrial Average closed on Friday. And the Dow Jones just shy of the 9,000 level. It got to those levels, but it fell below it by the end of the session, down 3.2. but at record highs of 8,983. Expectation will be at the 9,000 level for most of the week. The Nikkei 225 in Japan, that market is up 1% at the moment, up 161 at 15,678, reacting positively to renewed speculation of tax cuts to be introduced by Hashimoto in Japan. The Hang Seng in Hong Kong, it's closed today. That's the closing price from Friday. The Seoul Composite in South Korea down 6.37 at the 436 level, down almost 1.5%. It was down even higher than that, and that's on mostly domestic corporate reasons, and also just not a very good sentiment that if traders are staying out of Japan, but they will certainly stay out for the rest of the month in the Korean markets. And the Singapore Straits Times also trading water down 12 at 1,539.
Our top story now, and the governor of the Bank of Japan is urging his government to cut taxes to help stimulate the country's economy. Masaru Hayami has told the Wall Street Journal Europe that he will do his part by keeping Japanese interest rates low in the near future. His words will increase pressure on Japan's Prime Minister, Ryutaro Hashimoto, to take action to prevent the world's second largest economy slipping into recession. Now, many of Japan's trading partners have been critical of Tokyo's failure to produce decisive measures to tackle the crisis. Mr. Hayami says he is also confident Japan's Big Bang financial reform program, which began last Wednesday, will bring about further changes to the country's financial system.
Indonesia is going to have to prove it's committed to reform before receiving more of its $40 billion loan from the International Monetary Fund. That could mean it will not get any further money for about a month. IMF Deputy Managing Director Stanley Fischer, who was in Jakarta last week for talks with President Suharto, says there was going to have to be what he called a testing period. Since then, the government has announced the closure of 7 troubled banks and placed another 7 under official supervision. The move was made in an effort to restore confidence in the banking system.
And the European Union says it will stand by Asia to help it overcome its economic turmoil. The pledge came at the end of the ASEM summit of 25 Asian and European countries in London. Now, the main message they tried to get across was that there will be more international cooperation. CNBC's Chris Burns was there. He reports.
The curtains came down on an event dominated by the sorry state of many Asian economies. The host leader, UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, had told Asia that Europe is its friend in this time of trouble. But despite agreements on trade liberalisation and technical help for Asia's beleaguered tiger economies, there wasn't too much extra money on offer, and Germany had been reluctant to even give that. Nevertheless, Prime Minister Blair believes both regions now understand each other better.
To our Asian colleagues, it became clear that Europe believed in the fundamental strength of the Asian economies and that they will recover and prosper in the future. And for us in Europe, it became clear that Asia does have confidence that Europe is and will stand by Asia in its hour of need.
The conference took place amid renewed warnings that Japan's economy is teetering towards recession, but the Japanese Prime Minister was quick to try and shrug off such views.
If you look at net overseas assets of the Japanese, it is about $800 billion, and foreign currency reserve more than $220 billion. And the government has no external debt. Do you think that the country of that sort is on the verge of collapse?
ASEM is a relative newcomer on the global conference circuit. It will have to be seen to be making a concrete contribution to solving Asia's financial problems if it's to carve itself a permanent place in international policy making. Chris Byrne, CNBC, London.
Chris Burns is with us in the newsroom now. Chris, lots of goodwill, lots of talk, but was anything concrete achieved at the summit?
Well, there was lots of friendly words from Europe towards Asia, a friend in times of trouble, but there wasn't really very much in the way of hard cash. Europe came up with $50 million, which is a drop in the ocean, really. That's for a trust fund to be run by the World Bank, which is going to help with technical assistance to help Asia's tiger economies to restructure those economies. But there were warning noises from both sides about resisting the temptations of protectionism. And a flood of cheap Asian imports are expected as the Asian tigers try to revive their economies, use their devalued currencies to export their way out of trouble. So the message was that Europe and the US and Japan as well, really, are going to have to soak up some of those imports to help the situation.
So what is the situation then in Europe? Were the European leaders open to the idea of not raising trade barriers to those Asian imports, or even perhaps lowering some of their trade barriers that currently exist?
Well, I don't think they really said anything much about lowering trade barriers. That's all within the general framework of the World Trade Organization and the sort of what has been a drift over the past few years towards the lowering of trade barriers everywhere. Now, both sides are making the public noises that they don't want that process to be upset. They're both saying, look, both sides have got to keep their markets open because the continuation of free trade is really the way to do this. But whether you will see actually any extra steps from the US and Europe in this particular situation, I think that would be quite a big step for them to take.
Chris Burns, thank you for joining us this morning.
There's increased speculation over who is going to head the European Central Bank. Reports this morning say Wim Duisenberg, the head of the European Monetary Institute, rather than the French candidate Jean-Claude Trichet, will be picked for the job. CNBC's Howell Davis has the latest.
Last November, the French caused a storm by putting Jean-Claude Trichet, the head of the Bank of France, forward for the ECB presidency. But now, according to a report in the British newspaper, The Guardian, it seems likely that the original favourite for the post, Duisenberg, will take over after all. Citing a list circulating in the UK Parliament, the report also says that the Bundesbank chief economist, Otto Issing, will become the ECB's number 2. Analysts have welcomed the news, saying the Dutch-German ticket indicates the bank will take a tough line on inflation. But worries about the whole EMU project remain. On Friday, Bundesbank President Hans Tietmeyer said that Italy and Belgium won't be able to produce balanced budgets in the medium term, a claim denied by senior ministers in both countries. And in Denmark, there are further problems. The Danish Supreme Court will give its verdict on the legality of Danish membership of the EU later today. If the court rules against Denmark belonging to the European Union, the controversy over the leadership of the ECB will seem very insignificant by comparison. Howell Davis, CNBC.
And now to the battle of the automakers, and BMW says it won't be raising its bid for Rolls-Royce, despite signs that Volkswagen is offering more for the British luxury car maker. BMW chief executive Bernd Pichetsrieder told German newspaper Welt am Sonntag that he was confident shareholders in Rolls' parent Vickers would support BMW's bid despite the Volkswagen offer. BMW offered £340 million for Rolls-Royce and gained an edge because of its already close ties with the British company. But on Friday, Volkswagen increased its offer to what was thought to be between £360 and £380 million.
A new round of consolidation may be looming for the UK internet industry. The Wall Street Journal Europe reports that Demon Internet could unveil a heavyweight partner this week, a year after it began looking for one. Demon is one of several mid-sized companies in the British sector, and analysts say they expect it to be bought by a big telecoms company. The UK internet industry is unusual in Europe because it is not dominated by a monopoly. And observers say if Demon can secure the backing of a major international player, it could take advantage of its subscriber base to move into a strong position.
Chinese Prime Minister Zhu Rongji has arrived in France on a visit intended to boost bilateral political and economic ties. Zhu Rongji was met in Paris by French Finance Minister Dominique Strauss-Kahn, an indication of the economic importance of this trip. The Chinese Premier will also have talks with French President Jacques Chirac and Prime Minister Lionel Jospin. A proposal for the Airbus consortium to build a 100-seat airplane in China is expected to be among the issues discussed. Must be Monday morning here. I'm getting a bit tongue-tied.
That's all right. Right, let's check on the weather and travel report as well. In many parts of northwest Europe will start off quite sunny today, but there will be a rapid build-up of cloud during the morning, with heavy showers breaking out from mid-morning onwards. There will be local hail and thunder and fairly gusty winds too for Scotland.
Northern Europe will have another rather cold day. There'll be more rain in Denmark, southern parts of Norway and Sweden, and the Baltic states as well. But northern Scandinavia and Finland should have a mostly dry day with sunshine at times.
Across Europe, these are the maximum temperatures you can expect to find today.
And we'll bring you an update on the weather for the rest of Europe in 15 minutes.
Right, moving on to travel news. In the air this morning, there are some delays at Amsterdam Schiphol and Frankfurt Main. These are expected to affect services throughout the morning.
London Heathrow and Paris Charles de Gaulle are also reporting slight delays, but most services are running on time.
And on the ferries today, there have been some minor delays as well to services through the North Sea and through the Channel.
Now, coming up, we'll be bringing you the latest in world news. We'll also be joined by Sarah Clement, our markets reporter, to look at what has been happening in Asia, the response to the news over the weekend that tax cuts may be implemented by the leading Liberal Democratic Party to help stimulate the Japanese economy.
Plus, we'll have another weather and travel update. All that coming up right after this. Stay with us.
The Currency Report is sponsored by Chase Manhattan. Manhattan, providing business solutions as unique as your needs are.
Whether you're going places for business or leisure, there's only one thing you need to carry when you travel. Visa. It's accepted at over 13 million places in 101 countries around the world. So act lightly. Visa, the world's best way to travel.
I'd like to introduce you to Douglas Adams.
I'm the chief fantasist.
Remember him? He's the one that wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
The origin of the idea of Titanic was actually in one of the Hitchhiker books.
No, not that Titanic. He's launching a CD rock game called the Starship Titanic.
A much, much bigger market, which is people who don't play computer games.
So, has Douglas Adams tapped into the right market? Make up your own mind. Media Report, Tuesday 2000 and midnight CET on CNBC.
Stand by to supercharge your stock holdings.
We talk to the biggest and best in the investment business.
Power Lunch, weekdays at 1800 CET on CNBC.
You're watching Europe Today on CNBC. Our top stories this morning. The governor of Japan's central bank tells the government it must cut taxes to stimulate the economy.
The European Union says it will stand by Asia to help it overcome the region's economic turmoil.
And there is speculation that Wim Duisenberg is back at the top of the list to head the European Central Bank.
World news now, and the Serb government in Belgrade will today decide whether or not to hold a referendum asking its citizens whether they accept the participation of foreign mediators in the dialogue over Kosovo. An interesting aspect of this is, of course, that President Slobodan Milosevic of Yugoslavia only stages referendums he knows he will win. CNBC's Eastern European correspondent or editor, Peter Zala, reports.
The question put to Yugoslav voters will be very simple. Do you accept the participation of foreign representatives in finding a solution to the Kosovo problem? Western observers in Belgrade are expecting that the result will be a massive rejection of any foreign intervention in, as it's called, domestic Serbian matter. Yugoslavia's socialists made it very clear at the end of last week that they are totally opposed to the intervention of outsiders. By holding a referendum, the first one after 10 years, Belgrade is heading for direct confrontation with the international community, whilst at the same time Milosevic will find the necessary domestic support for his uncompromising policies towards the Kosovo. Furthermore, the expected result will put a substantial hurdle in the path of the attempts of the countries belonging to the so-called contact group to bring about a constructive dialogue between Serbians and Kosovo Albanians to achieve a peaceful solution. This in turn could lead to an intensification of sanctions against Yugoslavia, but as before, the country's leadership is quite prepared to take that risk. The Albanian majority of the Kosovo has already denounced the plebiscite. The leader of the Kosovo Albanians, Ibrahim Rugova, has repeated the wish of his people for independence from Serbia and from Yugoslavia. Rugova has suggested the creation of an international civilian protectorate as an interim measure. At the same time, he warned of a possible group of frustrated and armed Albanians whose activities were being directed by the Serb secret police, geared at bringing about renewed deployment of Serb police in the province. The referendum was also denounced at the weekend by NATO General Secretary Javier Solana. He called the latest tactical attempt by Milosevic a maneuver which wastes time and increases the risk of a conflict. Peter Zala, CNBC.
Now, the Bank of International Settlements is holding its monthly meeting today in Basel. The meeting will be dominated by the worsening economic situation in Japan and the acceleration of the dollar against the yen. Well, we're joined now by Dennis Baker of Dow Jones Newswires in Zurich to actually look at what's coming up here. Now, Dennis, what exactly is going to be on the agenda for today's meeting of the Bank of International Settlements?
Well, it's a closed meeting, but in the past months, the G10 central bankers have discussed the world economy in general, inflation, macroeconomic situation, and also some of the more exotic issues such as settlement risk and stuff. But at this time, this meeting will probably be dominated by the Japanese situation and what effect it will have on the dollar.
Now, what are we likely to see come out of that then? I mean, obviously they will be commenting about the dollar against the yen. Are we going to see anything concrete emerge?
Well, Hans Dietmeier, the chairman of the G10 central bankers and also the president of the Bundesbank, just 2 months ago expressed some hope that Japan was on the way to recovery. And then last month, he toned that down somewhat. And it'll be interesting to see if there is a ray of hope in his comments this time. And at about 1100 GMT, we expect him to address the press, and it will be very curious to see if he dares say anything about the dollar, especially the dollar yen.
Okay, Dennis Baker, Dow Jones Newswires, thank you very much for joining us there. We'll no doubt we'll be bringing you coverage of what exactly Hans Dietmeier does have to say at that press conference during the Money Wheel later this morning.
Sorry, I'm sure you'll be watching that today, so what
That's
else
right.
will you be watching?
I've got that sinking feeling that I think it's because of
losing Rosalie there.
You two just carry on while I sort out my seat.
I'll take the dollar because that's sinking as well, and we've seen that losing ground versus the yen, and that has the sinking feeling as well as it's slipped to the 135 level back to the 134.70 level, down a 0.53. Sterling is at 165.89 and the Deutsche Mark is at 184.21. That's also gaining back a little bit of ground, and the lira stronger as well. It's had a great quarter and having a great day today, 1,817. Well, to the European markets now, let's take a look where they're going to start the trading day. In a mixed session on Friday, after a record-breaking week, we did see some traders take some profits, namely in Paris and Milan. Zurich, though, moving ever higher, 87 points, and the London FTSE closing on a very strong note there at 60.64. Well, looking ahead now to the economic data we can expect today, and starting off in the UK, industrial production for February, we're expecting a rise there of 0.1%. In Italy and Spain, producer price index figures expected year-on-year. In Italy, we're looking for a rise of 1.3%, and in Spain, year-on-year, a rise of 0.5%. Well, now let's see what's in store for the German markets, and Peter Kaiser has this report from Frankfurt.
Here in Frankfurt, when they hit the floor, we'll be looking forward to a short week and a long weekend. Last week, we saw the DAX move up very strongly, rallying 3 days in a row, the last 3 days of the week, breaking through the 5,200 barrier. The big question is now, this week, considering the fact that it's a relatively news-thin kind of week, and the DAX itself, over the first 3 months of the year, has gained 20%, whether investors will take some of their easily gotten profits, sell out, and we'll see the DAX dwindle, or will the DAX continue its march up towards 5,300? As far as the corporate calendar is concerned, on Tuesday, Continental, the tire maker, and Merck, the pharmaceuticals manufacturer, will be reporting. Both of those shares in the DAX 100, very well sought last week, but only Daimler is the only blue chip reporting this week. It will be reporting on Wednesday. The Daimler share price shot up 5% on Friday. As far as macroeconomics are concerned, on Tuesday, the March unemployment, as well as the final CPI data will be coming out. That data, though, is not expected to be market moving. And finally, for your Post-it notes, the market will be closed on Friday for Good Friday. That's all from here in Frankfurt. Back to the studio.
Right, and now that Rosalie's back with us.
It gives new meaning to the idea of starting the week on the floor, doesn't it? But like the yen, I suppose.
Exactly.
Let's begin with a look at the Asian markets. Japan, finally admitting that the country is at its worst economic crisis since the end of World War II. Is this going to translate into any meaningful steps?
Well, let's hope so, Juan. Let's really hope so. I mean, it seems that they're at least taking it seriously now and realising that they just can't go on the way that they are. International investors have basically had enough. Even now they're hearing these comments about tax cuts. They're not willing to do anything really until they get the proof. But now they are talking about, of that 16 trillion, about 8 being related to stimulus measures that will actually sort of be new money in terms of corporate tax cuts and all the rest of it. So people will be focusing on that, I think.
Are we hoping these will be permanent rather than temporary? Because they have said that there will be an extension of temporary tax cuts. Are these likely to be permanent?
Well, I hope that they're permanent. I mean, they were saying that they would extend them previously, and that didn't really get the market going. So I think they have to really make some decisive moves here. And basically that is what the market's looking for. And of course, next Wednesday, we've got the good old G7 finance ministers getting together. That always focuses Japan on what they need to do. And we even had President Clinton saying Friday, basically, get your act together, get that economy going. So I don't know what else anybody else can say, really.
But there's also concern in the markets that, along with these tax cuts, we need to cut state spending. And there are no plans at the moment to do so by the government.
That's right. It seems that whole investment policy has been up the spout for a number of years because people, they're saying that the whole reason, or, you know, one of the major reasons Japan got into this was because of overinvestment in terms of they were investing in things with no return over the last few years when they had a booming economy. So they didn't set themselves up very well there. And now their response has been to have these stimulus packages, but just invest in infrastructure. Now, normally that's quite a good thing to go, and it's not that it won't get the economy going at all, but it just seems that they could be better spent elsewhere, and people are looking for those stimulus in terms of tax cuts and just to get consumer sentiment going. And of course, as you said just earlier, if they get the Nikkei and yen up, that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. That will help Japanese investors. And it's also, I mean, Japanese investors are sort of selling and moving abroad, but it's really the foreign investors in the last few weeks that have just basically said, right, we've had enough of this. We're going to sell the yen and we're going to sell the Nikkei, because they kept looking for opportunities to get back in, and they will still be doing that, but basically they sort of, threw their toys out the pram last week and said, right, I've had enough.
And there goes the toys of pretty much the rest of the region as well. It's not just
That's right. Well, that's what's so frustrating, particularly for the US. They're saying, well, you're not just doing this for yourself. We're all very closely linked together. And indeed, Asia's been telling the IMF and everyone else to help them out. And then Japan is very much seen as needed to help them out too. But they haven't been playing the game as far as maybe the US have been seeing. So they're saying, right, OK, we want to see you not just exporting your way out of trouble, we want to see some serious measures.
Now looking ahead to Europe this week, and there's obviously all eyes are going to be seeing what the Bank of England decides to do with its interest rates policy. I mean, any expectations from the market as to what's likely to come out of that?
It's been quite a weird weekend in a way, because the Bank of England, as we've been saying for the last few months, is new in its role. It wants to be seen like the Bundesbank, you know, a real controller of inflation, and that's their job. They're independent. And yet in the press over the weekend, you know, they were saying, well, you know, ministers are calling for the Chancellor to basically have a word or manipulate the Bank of England to say they're at the top end of the rate hike cycle. Now, the Bank of England is independent. The only thing that the Chancellor can do, theoretically, is change the inflation target. But I think, obviously, they chat. I mean, let's not be naive about this. And I think what we may see, or what the ideal scenario would be, is that if the Bank of England said, well, you know, gave some indication of which way they're seeing these rates going, most people believe now that we won't get that rate hike, even though a few pundits are still quite optimistic out of the market. Basically, retailing and everything else has been very patchy. We're getting the retail results out of the UK this morning in terms of smaller retailers, give us another indication, as well as the industrial production figures we're expecting today. That'll give us an idea of what's going on in the market. But most people think, you know, this economy isn't roaring away, so we don't need another rate hike.
And finally, we have this fascinating story on the front page of the Wall Street Journal Europe today, talking about raging bulls and the fact that continental equity markets are doing extraordinarily well. But some people now saying that perhaps we're close to a correction. A correction's due.
Well, it's a correction or a pause for breath. I guess it's just the size that matters. But we've seen that in the first quarter, basically, most of those European markets have hit the year-end targets. So, yes, you could say that maybe they're a little overrated. I don't think we're going to see a crash, or the market doesn't believe that. But I think, yes, you may see a pause for breath.
Right. Sarah, thank you. And we'll have more from you later on.
It's now time to check on the weather and travel news now, and parts of Eastern Europe will be very warm again. The warmest and the sunniest weather in Hungary and the Slovak Republic, but other countries will be colder and cloudier with showers and local thunder.
Southeast Europe will have a fine and very warm day with plenty of sunshine, although thunderstorms may affect Slovenia and Croatia later in the day, and that's not in Southern Europe, but still it may be affected.
And across Europe, these are the maximum temperatures you can expect to find today in the midst of thunderstorms and showers.
Yes, and we'll bring an update on the weather for the rest of Europe in 15 minutes' time.
And now moving on to travel news. In the air this morning, there are some delays at Amsterdam Schiphol and Frankfurt am Main. Now, these are expected to affect services throughout the morning.
London Heathrow and Paris Charles de Gaulle are also reporting slight delays, but most services are running on time.
And on the ferries, some minor delays to services through the North Sea and through the Channel.
Well, shortly on Europe Today, we'll have more market reaction to renewed speculation in Japan that indeed tax cuts are going to be introduced to help the country out of its present recession. Plus,
we'll also be looking at speculation that Wim Duisenberg will be heading up the new European Central Bank. So that's with us on CNBC today.
US Market Wrap, 2200 CET on CNBC.
CNBC presents Great Unanswered Questions of Our Time. Why is abbreviation such a long word? Why isn't there mouse-flavored cat food? And why is it called the CNBC ticker when it doesn't tick?
Okay, so it doesn't tick, but it does provide a constant update of commodities, bonds, currencies, stock indices, and live stock prices as they trade around the globe, plus company results and breaking headlines. CNBC's exclusive ticker. It's a big noise in business news. You may have noticed that there have been some changes to the CNBC scheduled programs. To help our viewers understand these changes, provide additional program information, or register your comments and opinions on the new look CNBC, we've set up a special telephone helpline. Simply dial 0117 909 1212 for calls within the UK, or +44 117 909 1212 for calls from Europe. The CNBC telephone helpline, ready to take your calls now.
60 minutes a day. It could be the best investment you make. CNBC's Europe Tonight, drawing the line under the business day. The news, in depth on the stories that affect you. The analysis, comment and opinion, finding out what it all means. It's what happened, the why and how, and what you need to know about it. Europe Tonight, Live every weekday evening at 1900 CET, 1800 UK. Only on CNBC.
Money, markets, business, news. CNBC, CNBC. Immediate, accessible, influential. CNBC, CNBC. Powerful, definitive, upfront. CNBC, CNBC. Europe, America, Asia, the world. Global coverage, worldly wise. CNBC, CNBC. The market mover, the market leader. CNBC, first in business worldwide.
Coming up this morning on Europe Today, the governor of Japan's central bank tells the government it must cut taxes to stimulate the economy.
The European Union says it will stand by Asia to help it overcome the region's economic turmoil.
And there is speculation that Wim Duisenberg is back at the top of the list to head the European Central Bank. It's 7:30 Central European Time on Monday, the 6th of April. Good morning and welcome to Europe Today. I am Juan Senor.
And I'm Rosalie Nelson. Good to have you with us this morning. Also ahead in the show, we'll have a full look at the markets. We'll be bringing you world news and also a look at the latest weather and travel situation.
Let's start now with a look at the live Asian markets and a reminder of how the Dow performed on Friday. And it was just shy of the 9,000 level. It got through that earlier in the session, but it fell back at the end of trading. Down 3.2 at 8,983, but expectation that it'll get up to the 9,000 level this week, and it will stay there possibly. Let's take a look at the live markets. The Nikkei in Japan, it is up 167 at 15,685, reacting positively to renewed speculation of tax cuts in Japan. The Hang Seng in Hong Kong, that's closed today, but it was down 137 points on Friday. The Seoul Composite, down almost 2 points at 440.57. And also losses in Singapore, where the Straits Times is down 12 at 1,539.
Our top story now, and the governor of the Bank of Japan is urging his government to cut taxes to help stimulate the country's economy. Masaru Hayami has told the Wall Street Journal Europe that he will do his part by keeping Japanese interest rates low in the near future. His words will increase the pressure on Japan's Prime Minister, Ryutaro Hashimoto, to take action to prevent the world's second largest economy slipping into recession. Now, many of Japan's trading partners have been critical of Tokyo's failure to produce decisive measures to tackle the crisis. Mr. Hayami says he is also confident Japan's Big Bang financial reform program, which was launched last Wednesday, will bring about further changes in the country's financial system.
And there's more bad news for Japan. Its economy is set to shrink this year for the first time in more than 20 years. That is according to the latest estimates released by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The OECD says the Japanese economy could contract by up to 0.3% this year. Growth in the US and in several major European countries is also predicted to be less than originally forecast in December.
The International Monetary Fund's Deputy Managing Director, Stanley Fischer, has signalled that the organisation will take a firmer line in implementing its revised reform package for Indonesia. The message came as the IMF decided to delay the second tranche of a $40 billion rescue package. Philip Lote reports.
Managing Director Stanley Fischer, who was in Jakarta for talks with President Suharto, says there's going to have to be what he called a testing period to gauge Indonesia's commitment to reform. Mr. Fischer didn't indicate how long that period would be, but it could be as long as a month.